Yes, thank you very much. Yes. Is the microphone working? Can you all hear? Aha, okay, great. So yes, my name is Ben Libberton. Thank you very much to all of you for coming today. Just to note before I start, I've put a page on my website for this talk, and that's because I refer to different things, to different links and things like that, so I thought it was better to put them all in one place so you can go and you can see the slides there. If I give any examples, you'll be able to see them there. The website's there at the moment. It's easy to remember, but I'll also put it up again at the end so you can see that. So yeah, my name is Ben Libberton and I'm a postdoc. I'm a researcher full-time at Karolinska Institutet in the Swedish Medical Nanoscience Centre. And a few years ago, I expressed an interest in communication, public outreach to the head of the centre, Agneta Richter-Dalfors. And she was also very keen for me to take on a role like that. And that's how I became a public information officer, which sounds like a bit of a strange title, but it's actually an important title when you do outreach to the public and to the press. It's important to say something like that to be able to actually get access to journalists and to press officers. But what I realised when I was doing this role and when I'm trying to engage the group and the researchers who I work with is that we are all actually our own public information officers. These days we're all responsible for promoting our own research and for reaching out to journalists, to the press and to the general public. And so basically my journey using lots of different tools, but especially Twitter, started from this point. And I have to say that beforehand, before I took on this role 1.5, 2 years ago, I was incredibly skeptical about using Twitter. I was an academic and I had the same sources of information as all of you do. People were coming up and saying you should use Twitter, you should tweet about your research all the time, you should build up a massive following, you should basically become a Twitter celebrity. And I thought, fine, okay, I'll give it a go, and I tried, but nothing really happened. And the people were still saying the same kind of things. You have to build up a massive following, you have to tweet all the time. And I tried and I tried and I tried, and nothing really worked, nothing happened. I didn't see any of the benefits from it. So I was skeptical when I took on this role. But what happened when I started taking promotion and outreach, specifically outreach to the media, seriously, it was at that point that I realised that Twitter was a very, very useful tool for outreach, and that a lot of the things that I had learned or that I had heard didn't necessarily apply, but there's actually a lot of interesting ways that you can use Twitter to really promote your science effectively. So I'm a researcher, I'm a scientist, I'm the public information officer. I'm also a member of Forskcom, which is a Swedish network for science and research communication, a very useful and important network that's becoming established in Sweden and throughout the Nordic countries. As a result of some of my work on Twitter as well, I'm also the community editor for an MPJ journal, Biofilms and Microbiomes, and a regular contributor to the community for the Nature Microbiology journal. Again, reaching out through Twitter, contacting people who are responsible for these kind of platforms has really allowed me to engage a lot more than I expected. And so, as I hinted at before, what I've noticed is that there seems to be an unhealthy attitude, unhealthy relationships with academics towards Twitter. You know the people who use Twitter a lot in your group, in your university, because it's all they talk about. And it tends to be they promote it so hard and think they want you to think that this is the only way that research is going to be conducted in the future. You can only use Twitter to promote your research in the future. Everything is going to be done through Twitter in the future. And then on the other side, you have the opposite. You have the people who won't accept it, who think that it's a complete waste of time, who say they're much too busy, much too serious to use Twitter for research. It has no application, it has no purpose in research. And one thing that I think highlighted that was a recent article in The Guardian on one of the Guardian blogs, which is this one here, and they said, "I'm a serious academic, not a professional Instagrammer." That was the title of the article, but of course they weren't just talking about Instagram, and throughout the article they referred to lots of different social media, especially Twitter. Because of course this academic, the academic who wrote this, who was anonymous, it was on an anonymous blog, said, "Why should I spend my time doing this? I'm far too serious, I'm far too busy doing other things. Why should I waste my time? If I do good science, then surely that will promote itself. Surely the outreach will be done itself if I focus my attention on doing work in the lab." And they got a lot of stick for this on Twitter. Obviously this was a blog, this was an electronic platform, and people were tweeting a lot about it saying that this is crazy. But it's what a lot of people think, and unfortunately, even though academics are busy, the notion that promotion will just happen, that your research will just promote itself, is becoming less and less true by the day, I think. There's lots of competition for people's attention. There's lots of new journals coming up every year. Every month even, it seems that there's a new journal that we can publish in. So actually getting noticed, getting our research noticed by our peers, people who we want to work with, who we want to cite us, getting noticed by the press, getting noticed by journal editors who we want to read our work in the future, is becoming more and more difficult. So I think if there's something that we can do as researchers to help that, then I think we should try and engage with it as much as possible. One of the biggest complaints I had about this article, and I don't necessarily fall out with the logic of this researcher, that, you know, time is precious. As researchers, we don't want to waste any time. So something that draws us away from what we do as a core, which is publishing papers and writing grants, it has to be worth it. But they say that they are serious and therefore they cannot use social media. And the thing is, Twitter is not serious, but at the same time it's also not fun. It's not really anything because it's just software. And I think a lot of people have this perception of social media and Twitter based on the people they know and based on how they use it. But just because that's how people use it now, or that's how the majority of people use it, that certainly doesn't mean that's the only way you can use it, and it doesn't mean that's the way that we have to use it. We can use it in completely different ways. And most importantly, it's a way to communicate. So I think as scientists, as academics, as people on the forefront of the various fields that we work in, I think it's important to at least explore or try and experiment a little bit with new ways of communication, given the importance that is being placed on communication by lots of different external sources, especially funding bodies. They find it, every year that new grant calls come out, they tell us that we should communicate more, we should outreach more. And so given that Twitter is a communication platform, let's think about it, let's experiment with it a little bit. And the immediate thing I thought about when I read this article, we are serious academics, we're not professional Instagrammers. If Twitter, social media is a new way of communicating, or a relatively new way of communicating, and that's all it is, it's just a piece of software, we can liken it to email. And maybe the title of that article could have been, "I'm a serious academic, I'm not a professional emailer." And I think we would all identify a little bit with that. You know, we are serious academics. We don't want to be emailing all the time. We don't want to be tied to our desks writing messages. We prefer to be in the lab. We prefer to be writing papers. But email happens to be a very, very important way of communicating for us these days. And Twitter could be, maybe not as important, but could be a very important addition to the way that we communicate in the future. So if it's just a communication platform, then the questions are, who do we want to communicate with? What is it that we actually want to say? How are we going to say it? And why would we even use that particular platform, for example, Twitter, to do that? And I suppose the important ones are how and why. And this is how Twitter differs a lot from email, how and why. How do you communicate? The way that you communicate using Twitter is obviously a lot more, it is different from email. And why would you communicate using Twitter instead of the communication platforms that we already have? And as I said, I was very, very skeptical about Twitter. I wasn't able to use it effectively until I came to this point in my career where I was doing research, and at the same time I was responsible not just for my own outreach but also for the outreach of others in my group. And when those two things aligned, when I wanted to promote my research, that's when I saw the use of Twitter. So I will go through a few how-tos now, because I know that some of the people attending haven't actually used Twitter at all before. So I want to go through how it works, how a tweet looks, just to give you some background, and then go through some more details of strategies for how to use it for outreach. So with Twitter, you have an address, like an email address. Mine, in this case, is at Ben Libberton, and that's unique to me. Nobody else has that address, or handle, as it's called on Twitter. So if you want to write to me, if you write to that address, then I will see it, I will know about it. And you can write to anybody. Everyone who is on Twitter now, whether they're celebrities, whether it's researchers, whether it's your family, they have this address, and it's easy to search for them if they use their name. So what kind of messages do you actually write? Well, a tweet is a simple, short message. It's 140 characters long, and this is really one of the defining features of Twitter as a communication platform. Very, very short messages, and you can write to people in this way. By including their address, their Twitter handle, you can actually write to them. So in this case, I'm writing to Karolinska Institutet. That's their Twitter handle. And this makes the messages very kind of informal and easy to read in a very, very short space of time. And that's one of the big differentiators from emails. Emails tend to be long and difficult to read for people who are quite busy and who have very, very overcrowded inboxes. Tweets tend to be a little bit different, and that's a useful thing to notice, and we'll come back to this later on. When you're actually trying to contact busy people, then tweets are quite useful, because you're more likely, or at least in my experience, I've had much better responses from busy people using Twitter than email. You can also use the hashtag symbol to apply a label to your tweets. And this is especially useful for things like conferences, events, themes. So in this case, I use the hashtag science. And that's because if I want to write a message that is classified within the theme of science, it's good to do that explicitly. So by writing hashtag science, that means that anybody who is interested in science, who is searching for that hashtag, will be able to find my message. And my message, as long as it's the newest one, will appear on top of all of the others. So you can do that for anything. You can do that in your field. If you're interested in the microbiome, for example, and you tweet about the microbiome, then you can hashtag microbiome, and that means you have a much higher likelihood of reaching people, of other people seeing your tweet who are also interested in the microbiome. So it facilitates this conversation. You can add pictures in your tweets, which is also a very good idea, I think. It makes them more interesting. It makes them easier to stand out from the other text tweets that are present in anyone's in any given feed. You can add links, which is also another good idea, I think, because it means that with your 140 character limit, you can't really say very much. And it means that if you can include a link, you can treat the 140 characters as some kind of a headline, and you can link to something relevant that actually expands on the point that you're trying to make. So that's very, very good. You can also do polls, which is a relatively recent thing from Twitter, but they are incredibly popular and incredibly good at getting engagement from people. And you can ask any questions you want. This is a poll that finished, I think, yesterday about the recent presidential debate in the US. And they are very engaging. As much as pictures and links, if you send a poll out, you know how it feels when you see one. If your friend sends you a poll, it's interesting to click and then check back later to see what the results are. So that's the anatomy of a tweet. That's how they look. There's also a certain structure to Twitter, which is exactly like email, except it's shorter and it's public. So if you just explore that for a second, you have an input. You have the things that you read, that you get to read on Twitter, and that's called the home screen. And you get input for your home screen. If you just sign up for Twitter today, you will have nothing there. You won't see anything, although Twitter will suggest accounts for you to follow quite quickly. But you can go to an account that you don't follow, for example, this one I'm interested in, Nature Reviews Microbiology, and you can click this button at the top, the follow button. Once you follow them, anything that these guys write will now appear in your home screen, so you'll get updates from them all the time. Now, you do this a lot, and you get lots of different people who are putting information into your home screen, and it can get a little bit overwhelming, especially if you're not reading Twitter every second of the day, which you probably shouldn't be. So if there are specific accounts that you are very, very interested in, for example, people that you want to start a relationship with, for people that you want to collaborate with, for editors that you want to get in contact with, and you want to know what they are saying very, very quickly, then you can also click this button at the top, the star button, and once that's clicked, that means you'll get notifications directly on your phone as soon as they tweet something. So that's really, really useful for engaging with people, with communicators, with journalists, with editors. If they're starting a conversation, if you want to talk with them, it's very, very important that you do this in a timely fashion. So I don't recommend you do this with a lot of different accounts, only with people that you actually want to start a conversation with. And we'll move on to a little bit more why you'd want to do that later on. So here's just an example of my home screen recently. You can see the two most recent tweets from two accounts that I follow. So as well as the input, the things that you read, the things that you take in, there is also the output, the things that you give out, the things that you share with the world, and that's your profile. So anything that appears on your profile will be your output. So here's an example of my profile this weekend. You can see my bio, and then you can see the last thing that I tweeted about at that point. So if you want to add something to your profile, it's very, very easy. You just click on this button at the bottom, and then you write something. You write your message, your tweet, 140 characters, and you click tweet, and it goes out into the world. So that's if you do it yourself. There are other ways to add things, to add output to your Twitter profile, and that's by retweeting. So for example, I can see this message here. I go to PLOS Pathogens. I see that they've written something that I'm interested in, and so I click on this button at the bottom, which is the retweet button, and that's basically a sharing button. So it'll take the tweet that I have read from PLOS Pathogens, it'll take it and it'll republish it exactly as it is on my profile, because it's something that I agree with or that I think my followers, the people who follow me, will share or will like. And this automatically gives attribution to the original source. So it automatically gives attribution to PLOS Pathogens, so there's no plagiarism involved or anything like that. And if you want to modify the message in some way, you want to add something to it, add a little bit of commentary, you can also do that by pressing this retweet button. You'll be able to add a little line of text at the top saying, this is a good article, or I know the authors, or this, that, and the other. Another way is to reply to a tweet that you see. If you click on this button, you reply. And as soon as you click on that button, then this screen will come up. And so I'm talking to @PLOS Pathogens, and I can type my reply. Now, if you just type a reply after this, this actually won't show up in your profile. And the reason is because it's a response to something that isn't actually on your profile. So Twitter says, we don't want these random replies to be showing up in your profile because it will look out of context. So if you have a lot of replies to lots of different questions, lots of things that you've seen, then it's not a good idea if they all show up as just random answers, because it won't make sense. However, if you think to yourself, this actually does make sense out of context, I want this to show up in my profile, I want others to be able to see this easily, then you just move plus pathogens away, or you move the @ symbol away from the start of the tweet, and that will prevent it. A lot of people actually just add a little dot in front, and that means that it will appear on your profile and it will be easy to search and to find. So as a summary, the tweets are short, informal, easily organised and targeted messages with the potential to reach many. I didn't really discuss so much about the fact that they are informal because, as I said before, Twitter is just a communication platform, it's just software, it's just a way to communicate. But because it's limited to 140 characters, it is inherently informal because there's no space to actually include formality. And that's quite a useful trait, because sometimes when you're trying to contact people, when you're trying to reach out to people, you can feel a little bit unsure about how should I address this person, how should I sign off, what information should I give. That's kind of negated by using Twitter and by tweeting people, because you don't have to be formal, it's not expected. And so that's a positive thing, possibly a negative thing as well, depending on how you look at it, but that is possibly one quality that is inherent in Twitter and something to think about. So as I've been using Twitter for outreach for a few years now, I have developed a few rules for myself to know basically what I should tweet and if it's appropriate to tweet. Because a lot of people they feel unsure about what kind of messages they should put out there. And I totally understand this, but as I had kind of an official role within a centre and I was representing that centre with my personal Twitter account and also representing Karolinska as I work here, it actually became a little bit easier to know what I should say. And I think these kind of restrictions are actually quite useful when we think about tweeting ourselves. So I'll go through the rules that I use. If you want to adopt them, you can. If you want to change them, add in others, drop them, that's absolutely fine, because at the end of the day, when you do use Twitter as a person, as an individual researcher, you are, to a large degree, at liberty to express your personality. You are ultimately responsible for what it is you're saying, so you should take responsibility for that. So the first thing I do and I recommend to people is to use your real name. So my Twitter handle is @Ben Libberton, and it didn't used to be that, it used to be @BenLib. But I changed it because I noticed when I was at conferences and things like that, I would be talking on Twitter about presentations, and I'd want to talk about a presentation that somebody gave. I knew they were on Twitter, but they had a Twitter handle that wasn't their name, for example, Pipette Hero. So I'm talking about them saying, @Pipette Hero gave an amazing presentation about this. Now, if you're not on Twitter and you're reading that, or you don't have the opportunity to click on the handle and see who Pipette Hero is, you don't know who they are. So it's actually useful to put the information of who they are in the handle themselves. So in that case, I wouldn't say @Pipette Hero, aka someone's name, gave a very good presentation. It helps to save space and it helps to let people know exactly who you are, because there are ways for tweets to reach people and to be shown to people who aren't actually on Twitter. So it's good to put your name in there. If you don't have your name in there, you have 3 basic options. You can leave it the same. I mean, it's not the end of the world. You can always put your name in somewhere else in the tweet. You can change it, as I did. I changed my Twitter handle. It was the exact same account. I just changed the name to make it my full name instead of an abbreviation. Or you can make another account, which is quite common actually. People have a pseudonym or account for personal use, for communicating with their family and friends, and then have a professional account, which is just your name, where you apply strict rules about what it is you say and how you use it, and that's your name. And that would be much easier, I think, for people to engage with you when you're talking at conferences or when you're engaging in conversations with people on Twitter. Tweets, thick, not thin tweets. Now this is a Twitter term that I'll explain. It's basically exactly like a sandwich. So thick sandwiches on Twitter are better than thin sandwich. A thin sandwich is 2 slices of bread and not much else in between. And that's the same as a tweet. It doesn't really contain very much information in it. It doesn't contain very much for you to engage with or to chew on, so to speak. So we like to have thick tweets. So how do we do that? Well, take a lot of photos. Include photos in your tweets. It's a very, very good idea. It's easier for people to engage with. It's easier for your tweets to actually stand out in what can become quite a crowded profile or home screen. Also, as a side note, this is a really, really good habit to get into, and I've noticed this more and more as I myself take more photos in the lab and around and about. It means that you actually build up a library of useful, kind of pretty looking photos that you can use for different situations. For example, when you're giving a presentation, you can use them on Twitter, you can use them on your websites. And I noticed this, I think it was a few weeks ago, I was actually sat down talking with a journalist, and sometimes the concepts that we try and explain are a little bit abstract. Sometimes it's hard to engage people who aren't in our field and get their attention. But if you have a lot of nice looking photos, I just went through the photos on my phone that we had on Twitter, immediately you see people's eyes light up. You can see that they like the colours, you can see they like the paraphernalia that we have lying around in the lab. It looks boring, it looks normal to us, but if you get in the habit of taking photos and using them with your tweets and with other forms of social media as well, it has a much bigger impact and it's spread a lot more. Links, as I said before, are always good. It's a way to expand on what you're trying to say in a tweet. It's a way to engage people more. It's a way to allow people to follow from the tweet that you've just posted and go and find more information. An example of this is at a conference. If you're talking, you can say, that was a great talk by so-and-so. Here's a link to their website. Here's a link to their last publication. If I'm reading that as someone who's not attending the conference, then I get a lot more out of that tweet than just saying, oh, okay, they're at a great conference and someone's talking, that's amazing. It doesn't help me so much, but if you give me something else and it's like, okay, great, I know that they're listening to this and that it's actually good. It's an interesting paper, it's an interesting concept. Hashtagging is also important, and especially at things like conferences, and I'll come on to this in a little bit, hashtagging and basically segmenting the tweets that you are writing and putting them in a bin with all of the other tweets on that topic is very, very useful for people who are searching Twitter, looking for themes, looking for things that they are interested in. This will help your messages, your promotional material come out on top. I mention people a lot as well, and this is basically to do with drawing other people into a conversation you're having. If you start off on Twitter, presumably you're not going to have any followers. So if you tweet something, the only way that people would see it is if they were following you, and then your message would come up on their screen, on their home screen. If you don't have any followers, then you're basically just tweeting into thin air and nobody will read it, because unfortunately with Twitter, the lifetime of tweets is actually quite short. It's kind of visible and live in the internet for about 18 minutes apparently, and once it's gone beyond that, it kind of sinks down and gets buried by all the other tweets that come on top of it. So if you do that and nobody sees it initially, then it can be hard for it to ever be seen. But if you're talking about something that you know will be of interest to other accounts, for example, Nature Microbiology, for example, Nature Reviews Microbiology, then it can be good to bring them into the conversation directly and show them what you're talking about. And if you have tweets that have links that are interesting and relevant, if you have tweets with photos that are interesting, relevant, entertaining, then you're much more likely to get a response from larger accounts. So basically what I'm saying is pull people in, and it means that you don't have to have a very big Twitter following to get engagement from large accounts and the followers of those large accounts as well, if they choose to engage with you by retweeting it or reposting it in some way. Some of you may recognize this if you've just started a Twitter account. This is your bio picture as soon as you open a Twitter account. It's an egg because it's kind of assuming that as a Twitter user, as a fledgling bird who is going to be tweeting a lot, you are kind of unhatched. So the message here is to take care of your Twitter bio as soon as you can and make it a little bit more appealing and attractive, or at least informative. So here's an example of a Twitter bio that has no adornment, no work on it. You can see the egg there is the profile picture, there's no picture at the top, and there's no description of what this person does. And here's my profile with my photo, some attractive, colourful images, and also a description of what I do. And the description of what I do is relevant to the people that I want to listen to me. Namely, in my case, it's journalists and editors. So I want to tell them that I'm a researcher, and I want to tell them that I'm involved in outreach, and also that I'm in Sweden, because with time zone differences and things like that, it's important. So think about what you want your prospective audience to know about you, think about what's important, and then put it in your bio, and also include a link to something online. Here's my website, but this can be your KI profile, or it can be a LinkedIn profile or something that gives the reader more information about you. I spoke about retweeting before, but I would also say retweet with care. So this is when you see a post that you like and then you click the retweet button. Now this is really useful because it allows you to share interesting information that has already been put together nicely in the form of a tweet. You can share that with people online. However, if you don't think about exactly how you do this, you can be on your coffee break or something like that, and you can bring up Twitter and you can see lots of nice tweets that have been posted, and you click retweet, 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 retweet. And you retweet a lot in a short space of time, and that doesn't appear very well to your followers. So if I'm following that, I'll pull out my phone after you've had your coffee break and think, oh my goodness, what's going on here? There's just spam from this person, they've just been retweeting. I see all of those messages at the same time, and it's not very engaging. It's the opposite of engaging. So if you see things that you like and that you want to retweet, then do it. It's fine, it's good. It's good to share things, interesting things that other people have posted, but don't do it all at the same time. You can either wait and do it later, or there are actually tools that you can use that I'll share at the end of this. Imagine you're at a party. Now this is a rule that I have that is actually very important and kind of interesting, because it prevents me from doing kind of antisocial things that you wouldn't do at a party that are still antisocial on Twitter, on social media. And the main thing that I see is when people just promote their own things, like a journal article being published or a job offer. So to me, that is like if you have a journal article published and you walk into a party, you just kind of kick the door down and walk in and say, I've just published in Nature, walk around, show everybody, and then walk out the door again. That's kind of what you're doing on Twitter when you only promote your own things. At the same time, retweeting is similar. You kind of just walk around the room at the party, just listening to what other people are saying, and then shouting that out instead and walking out. So if you think that it's actually a party, think that it's a social gathering of professionals at a conference, that you can actually go and interact and talk to people. Look for accounts of people who are in similar positions to you in different institutions around the world who are talking about research, and engage them. If they tweet about something, if they talk about an article that has been published, if they talk about an event, then all you have to do is actually just reply to them and ask them a question, or make a comment, or share something else. Treat it as a conversation. And this is a really good way to build up rapport with people very, very quickly online, on Twitter. Give Twitter love. One of the things that I haven't talked about in this bar at the bottom is the like button. And this is very important actually, because in accounts that tweet a lot, that are kind of high profile, they can tweet things that don't actually get liked. And so this is called the like button. If you click it, the person on the other side immediately gets a notification that you, have liked what they have written. And that's nice, right? That's an important validation for the message that they've just written. It's an important validation for the link that they've just shared or the photo that they've just shared. And that can be anybody. That can be a high-powered journalist. That can be an editor of a journal. It helps you appear on their radar by doing things like this, even if you have a very, very small Twitter account, even if you don't have any followers. By liking messages, by liking tweets from other people, you appear on the radar of people that you would like to build rapport with or that you would like to influence in some way in the future. Show your personality. I think this is important, but it obviously is a double-edged sword as well, because it has to be professional. So if you are making the choice to use Twitter in a professional way, and if you associate your name with your Twitter account, then almost by default you are associating some of your professional life with that Twitter account. You have to be professional. So show your personality, but do it in a professional way. You might be tempted not to show any of your personality and just tweet business things, all about papers, all about science. But the most engaging, the most popular, the Twitter accounts with the most followers are the people. They're not the institutions or the companies or the TV channels. So people like to engage with a face, they like to engage with a person, they like to know that somebody specific is behind a Twitter account. And so if you use your personality in the messages that you send out, then you're more likely to be engaging. And that can be tricky, but a technique that is useful sometimes is to use a composite, or in internet marketing, I think it's called an avatar, which is where you basically think of a group of people that you want to communicate with or that you want to influence, for example, postdocs and PIs who are researching the microbiome, and then imagine, so it's kind of a thought experiment, imagine a composite postdoc who represents the group as a whole, and so that you can communicate with them very, very easily. So you don't have to think too much about, will I offend this person, will I offend that person, should I show my personality here or not? Make a composite of the group that you want to target, that you want to listen to you, and write specifically for them. So in summary, there were 13 rules that I made for myself to make tweeting more effective, to make it more engaging, and also make it easier to decide what it is you should say, or what it is I should say. Another important thing that I want to address is the levels of engagement, because I think this is a barrier for a lot of people. They assume that to be on Twitter, you have to engage all the time, you have to be tweeting all the time, you have to tweet regularly, and that's not true at all. There are lots of different levels of engagement. I want to give the example of a conference to demonstrate that. So if you go to a conference, normally there will be a hashtag conference, whatever it might be. And basically, if you want to engage with Twitter, all you have to do is make an account and search for the hashtag and read what's going on. That is a way to engage with Twitter. That is a way to get some value from Twitter as an academic. You don't need to have any followers to do that. You don't even need to have a fully made out bio to do that, but it's incredibly useful. Often with conferences, especially the ones that are actively tweeted, there are kind of hidden conversations that are going on Twitter about the talks, about the conferences, and you don't have access to that if you're not reading it. But this is especially useful if you don't attend the conference but you know it's going on. You can simply look at the hashtag and read what the talks are about. You can then start talking to attendees. If people are tweeting about the talks, you can start replying, you can start adding things in. If someone says, this was a great talk by so-and-so, you can add another paper that is related. But you know, the rules that I said about before, making it engaging, adding photos, adding polls, adding links, they still apply, but you can start interacting with people and building up these online relationships with them. You can tweet about presentations, so you yourself can take photos if it's permitted at the conference and tweet articles about presentations. This doesn't have to take a lot of engagement, it's kind of getting close to the top, but it doesn't have to be a lot. But what you can actually think of this is a service to other people within your community or within your lab. So when I do this, or when I did this at a recent conference that I'll talk about in a little while, I was there with 2 of my colleagues and the rest of my lab was back at home. And so what I thought was, if I tweet about the presentations and talks and I make them like a digital set of notes that are accessible online, then I'm actually serving my lab back at home because they have access to all of the information from the talks. Not exactly the same as attending a conference, obviously, but they get an understanding of what's going on, they get an understanding of who was talking, and they get something to read, something to do. And then even a little bit more advanced of that, if there are a few people that you know at a conference, you can actually tweet as a team as well. So sometimes when you're at a conference and there's something very, very timely going on, someone has just said something, it can be quite important to get the message out in that moment because there is a time element to Twitter. As time goes on, the tweets kind of go down and down the pecking order. So if you have to tweet something quickly, it can be difficult to make it as engaging as it might be. You might not have time to construct a picture, a photo, you might not have time to find the right link. But if you work in a team, if you have people who are in an office somewhere, or you have people at a conference, you can ask them to have a look at your Twitter feed and to take tweets, retweet things, and maybe add information that would be useful to them on that one. And that's very, very useful and very, very powerful, in fact, and something that we did at our last conference from the Swedish Medical Nanoscience Centre. And the point is this, you don't have to be tweeting all the time. If all you ever do is make a Twitter account and you just go to conferences and search the hashtag, then that could be useful to you as an academic. You might find people, you might find information that is useful to you, and that is fine. On the other hand, you might think that actually as a communication platform, this is really useful for reaching out to collaborators, to students, and that is also fine as well. But as I mentioned before, there tends to be a polarity between the way that we're told to use Twitter. Either it's rubbish, it doesn't work, stay away from it, it's a waste of time, or you should be on Twitter all the time. There is really a lot of different ways to interact with Twitter in between. And I think that's a great thing about being academics, being scientists. We are critical in our ways of looking at information that we get, but we're also kind of curious and experimental. And I think Twitter is a perfect way for us to experiment and to see if it will work or not. I'm going to go through a few case studies now. So one of them is discovering papers. This is really, really useful. Again, you don't need to have a following to do this. You just need to find people or find accounts or find hashtags that deliver useful information to you. One of the ones, an account that I follow is at Microbiome Digest. And this is a researcher in the US, and she basically every single day curates all of the microbiome literature that has been published and tweets it out. And she also blogs about it. Now this is great for me because I don't actually work on the microbiome, so it's very, very difficult to stay on top of that literature. But because I follow the account, I'm kept up to date in general with all the new things that are coming out, and I get a quick digest of what's going on. And that is really, really useful because it allows me to keep more or less ahead of a set of literature that I don't have time to really keep ahead of properly by reading all the papers like I do in the fields that are more relevant exactly to what I'm doing. Talking to journalists and editors. Now this is basically the main reason that I use Twitter. This is why I started using Twitter, is because I wanted to promote my research to the press, and I would email journalists and I would get absolutely no response. And having met journalists now and spoken to them, I understand why it is, because a journalist's email inbox is an absolutely disgusting thing. It is completely full. It is full of pitches from every single person, from companies, from PR agencies. They tend to be long, they tend to include a lot of information that's not relevant, and it's very, very difficult to find anything. Tweets are actually different. They can assess a tweet very, very quickly, see if it's worthwhile, and if you use engaging tweets like I was talking about, using photos, using links, then it's much easier for them to get a sense of whether it's important or not. And also talking to journal editors, it's also very, very difficult to get a response from a journal editor because their email inboxes are kind of similar. They're very, very full. If you write a long text, if you're worried about how to address them, formality, it can be difficult to read. And if they think they'll give you a response later on, they can just archive it and never come round to it. So these are two examples of tweets that I actually used that got responses from one from a very, very high up editor from a newspaper and one from an editor from a journal. So I'd been emailing this editor from the newspaper for a long time, getting no response. And then I thought, okay, I'll try tweeting them instead. And I tweeted this image. And I'll show you the website I actually used to make this image. I took the picture on my camera phone, made it look like a little quote. Within 5 minutes, I had an email response from that editor. And within an hour, I was actually on the phone with them. So an email going to their inbox doesn't get read. A tweet is easy to look at and assess whether it's good or not. And it jogs their memory if you have been in contact with them before. This was something I actually posted in the Nature microbiology community. It was a pitch. I was talking about a conference. So you can see I included the conference hashtag. I couldn't actually attend, so I wrote this post about it. And the editor contacted me immediately as soon as the post went up saying, can I use this photo for the Nature account? And they took the photo, included my Twitter handle in it, and reposted it. And I got a lot of activity on my own account from that. See how we're doing for time. Conference tweeting. So I'll give two examples of this one actually. One was a conference that I didn't attend. And this is a write-up I made about the conference, which I'll link to at the end. I'll give you the link. But basically, I was in Stockholm, the conference was in London, and this was a hashtag. And all I did was follow the hashtag. I engaged a little bit with people. But I was so impressed with the information that I had, I said, right, I'm going to write a summary of this conference, and I wanted the attendees to read it to see how accurate it was. And it was actually incredibly accurate. I knew things about the conference. You know, I knew what the door handles looked like at the conference venue. I knew what the conference venue looked like. I knew what the program looked like. I knew who was speaking. I even knew that a lot of the presentations used Comic Sans when they shouldn't have been doing. So there was this whole conversation going on Twitter that allowed me to really get a really profound understanding of what was going on at the conference. Granted, it's not the same as being there, but it's incredibly, incredibly useful. So I thought, I will do the same at the next conference I go to. So we attended a conference, a nanoscience conference in Los Angeles, and I thought, right, I want to do the same. I want my lab at home to actually see that, to understand what's going on at the conference, to have the same experience. It wasn't quite like that, and what I realised is that to get such a deep, engaging view of what's going on at a conference, you do need to have a lot of people tweeting at the same time, tweeting different things, tweeting funny things, tweeting photos, tweeting about the presentations themselves. I was actually the only person tweeting at this conference, which made it kind of different, but it was still good. So there were 100 to 200 attendees. At the time, I had 100 followers, which is not very many at all. It'll take a few months to get that many. And basically, every time there was a presentation, I would tweet. As I said in my rules before, I would try and tweet something engaging. One tweet per presentation with some kind of a link to additional information, hopefully a photo if I could. And just the tweets from my account with that hashtag were seen over 40,000 times, with a following of 100 and with 100 to 200 people in attendance. So that was absolutely staggering. I couldn't believe that happened, and that's obviously because of the nature of Twitter allowing people to very, very easily take and share posts that you write, especially if you write them in an engaging way, especially if you include all the elements I was talking about. It's very, very easy to people to do that, so you can actually reach a wider audience. And this is important for getting grants as well and getting funding, because it's very, very easy to quantify your outreach using things like social media. There are tools that I'll talk about in a little while, right at the very end, that actually allow you to quantify it. And this is very, very useful when you're writing grants, because it seems that every year we get the new proposals coming through, and we have to write more and more and more about outreach. We have to be specific. We have to say how we're going to reach people and how many people we are going to reach. Now, with something like social media, with something like Twitter in particular, it's very, very easy to get numbers, to get impressive numbers, to show how you are going to spread and disseminate the information that you're going to produce as the recipients of some grant money. At a recent conference in New York as well, we also got followed by the New York Academy of Sciences on our medical nano account, and that's also important. You don't have to have a lot of followers, but if you start engaging with people, if you start engaging with accounts that are important to you, it means that eventually they will follow you back if you produce useful information. And I'm not saying you have to produce information all the time, you have to tweet all the time. Just make sure that your tweets are engaging, and that's good, because it means now that anything we tweet will be seen automatically by the New York Academy of Sciences. And if we get other influential Twitter accounts following us, like journals, like funding bodies, then it means they are kept up to date and we are kept at the front of their mind by using Twitter. So that's my summary basically. You can reach influencers and you can quantify your outreach via Twitter, and that is basically the crux of why I think it's useful. Influencers being if you want to get a grant, if you want to get a job, you can contact these people very, very easily. There's a very, very low barrier to getting in touch with them. There's no need for formality. You don't have to worry about how to compose a message because there's no room. And from my experience, you get a lot better feedback, you get a lot better response rate using Twitter than on email. So quickly now I'll go through some tools that I use for helping. Altmetrics is a very, very useful tool when you're writing grants for quantifying your outreach. It's very, very new. It can be difficult to actually understand what the numbers mean, but Altmetrics, if you look at it and look for the little donut close to your articles when you publish them, it will always give you your score in context. So it'll tell you how good your article performed compared to all the other ones that have been indexed. And that's useful for grants because it's a number, it's evidence of how you've done outreach in the past, and you can project then how are you going to do outreach in the future. Over, and again, all of this is going to be linked at the end. I'm going to put the link up so you can find it. Over is an application on my phone. I use it for adding text to images. So if I want to post a picture, but I want to write text on it, then I use this app. It's useful for kind of expanding the amount of information you can put in a tweet, making it more useful, making it look better. There's also filters and things like that to make it look pretty. Buffer, I talked about the problem of retweeting a lot and doing it all in one go. Buffer is a web app, you can get it on your phone. You basically put all of the posts, all of the information that you want into this app and tell it how often you want to send them out, and it will send them out on a regular basis. Tweetdeck is basically a web application, so you don't use it on your phone, you use it on your desktop, and it basically expands the number of screens you can see, the Twitter screens. So see here you have your home screen, but you can also see hashtags that you've searched for. So if you're at a conference, this is very, very useful. You can search for a few different hashtags at the same time, and then you can see everything coming to the top as it's tweeting. You can respond to it very, very quickly. Sometimes it's useful to have this open on your desktop, you know, if you're not concentrating on something very much. If you're at a conference, this can also be a useful way of making sure that you stay on top of everything. But it's something to explore maybe. Storify is another web-based service. It's completely free, but in Storify, you can take any or the most popular social media platforms, and you can take tweets, you can take Facebook posts, and you can put them into Storify and make a standalone web page that will actually tell the story of what it is you were looking at. So for example, a conference, you can take all the conference tweets, put them into Storify and make your own web page. And that's very useful, for example, for people that aren't on Twitter. If you want to promote this via email after the event, you can just email this, and you can also embed it in web pages. Canva is an online design tool, again free. It's very, very easy to just put your images in there, put filters on, put text on, make them look attractive and engaging to people. So in conclusion, I think I am still skeptical about Twitter. I'm skeptical when people say you should use it in a certain way and that this will guarantee you some kind of results. I think that it is very, very powerful. I think it's a communication platform, and I think that as academics, as people who are interested in either outreach to the public or basically quantifying outreach for grants, I think it's a very, very useful tool to experiment with. And I think you should experiment with it, and I think you should try and decide what kind of results you want to have and measure those as much as you can. And yeah, the last thing is to just say thank you to you all for attending. Thank you to all my colleagues at the Swedish Medical Nanoscience Centre who kind of indulged me in these experiments and helped me to kind of progress with this. And also thank you to Annette and the Career Service for letting me talk to you today. And as long as you're willing to stay for a little bit, I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.